I'm Andrew Harding, and this is The Documentary. Picture an old man standing outside his house on a steep hillside. He looks sturdy, cheerful too, grinning broadly and joining in when some neighbours turn up to sing old Zulu songs. Later, he'll head indoors to join some of his many children and grandchildren dancing together for a TikTok video. Jacob Zuma has plenty of reasons to be cheerful. He's lived an epic life. The poor goat herder who joined South Africa's liberation struggle, went to prison, then followed Nelson Mandela's footsteps to become president. No wonder Zuma's trademark is his chuckle.
I fell instantly in love with him, instantly under his spell. The way he speaks, the way he relates, the way he laughs, the way he calms you down. Some of us would have given our lives for him.
But the laughter is masking something. People have noticed it when he's served tea or food. A hesitation, a suspicion, a fear.
I have survived attempts to kill me.
For years, Zuma believes powerful forces have been trying repeatedly to poison him.
People looking to poison me or being instructed by their handlers to do so, finally poisoned. A very dangerous poison.
He's serious about this. You could say obsessed. South Africa's security services have gone to extraordinary lengths to check Zuma's food.
There was so much resources that were dedicated to protecting the president. This would include the toxicology unit. So you would expect that at least we could detect the poison.
A significant amount of money appears to have been spent on this unit. What amount was spent?
It was 1.8 million rand cash per month.
Zuma's fear of poison is strange, but not unique, not in a country with a past as tortured as South Africa's.
When that chemical hits you, within an hour, you start vomiting, you're throwing out, you start sweating, you are shaking, and can't walk, can't move. You are lying down like a lump of flesh and bones, but still conscious.
Welcome to Poison on the BBC World Service, a story of one man's toxic obsession and the battle for South Africa's future. To understand Zuma, or at least to put his fears in some perspective, we need to travel back.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Back in time to the South Africa he grew up in. I'm driving inland now on a very windy little potholed country road, heading away from the coast, away from the Indian Ocean and up into what's known as Zululand. It's beautiful here. There are these huge fields of tall green sugarcane, the tops bristling in the wind. I'm heading to Nkandla, a tiny farming town where Jacob Zuma was born in 1942. So this is the bare hillside where Jacob Zuma used to herd goats and cattle as a boy. A pretty tough rural upbringing. There's a woman with two kids over there. She's chopping a thorn tree for firewood. I'm heading down a path now towards a small cottage homestead where I'm told one of Jacob Zuma's close cousins, Kanya Zuma, still lives. So I'm sitting with Kanya Zuma, who is Jacob Zuma's cousin. You're 77 years old, right?
Yeah.
And we're in your homestead. And lots of chicks and chickens around us. That's the noise you can hear. His laugh is just like his cousin's.
We grew up in one big polygamous family. Jacob was very smart. He had no fear of the cold. In winter, as a small boy, he would just wear his very short khaki shorts, tied with his scout belt, and he would be naked on top. We were looking after the cows, after the goats, and everything. And we played stick fighting, and he was very good at that. He could beat up anyone.
This is the world that shaped Zuma, a world of polygamous marriages, of Zulu culture and traditional medicine, of powerful chiefs, and stories of battles against British invaders. Zuma's mother was too poor to afford schooling for her son. He would later talk of his frustration as the other children went off to study.
I was keen to go to school. I wanted to go to school, but the circumstances just did not allow me to do so. But I had no father. My mother was working. The misery and poverty and struggling mother. As a boy, I faced the world without a father. I began to realize how hard the world was.
So at the age of 16, Zuma left home, heading to the coast to find work, and in the process properly encountering South African apartheid, a brutal racist system designed to keep the black majority firmly under white control.
I had to find some odd jobs, helping in gardens, working in the shops, cleaning and everything. That was possible for me. It was not a good experience.
2 years After working for 2 years for some white guy in Durban, he went missing. It was only later that we discovered he was arrested because he joined the resistance forces against the apartheid government.
Zuma was quickly drawn into the fight against apartheid. Black ANC activists on the streets, an outspoken black lawyer, Nelson Mandela, forced into hiding.
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
I think joining the ANC and the trade union movement was an important decision that I took that changed my life. I wanted to participate in the fight against oppression, and I've done that.
Zuma joined the armed wing of the ANC, Umkhonto we Sizwe, the spear of the nation. But just like Mandela, Zuma was caught and convicted in 1962 of plotting to overthrow the apartheid regime. Both men were sent to a notorious prison.
A small, flat, rocky island northwest of Cape Town. The ocean around it is icy cold, and there is a dangerously strong current. Nobody has ever escaped from there. Mandela and other leaders such as Sisulu are...
Zuma was sentenced to 10 years on Robben Island. He was 20, an uneducated revolutionary, joining Mandela and other older icons of the struggle.
We traveled to Robben Island together with about 61 other prisoners. We stayed together in the same cell. He did 10 years and I did 15 years. Actually, we were very good friends.
This is Ibrahim, 84 years old now.
We were sleeping on the floor. Well, they only introduced beds when I was already 14 years in prison.
And it was here, in prison, that Zuma finally received an education.
He had very little knowledge of English, and many of us, including myself, then assisted him in his studies. We registered him into a college, and then he progressed very, very well. He was reading Tolstoy, Anna Karenina. Well, yeah, he liked Shakespeare. I think he liked Macbeth very much. The important thing about Zuma, he was a very, very popular person on Robben Island. He was an extremely, extremely disciplined person. So when he left prison, we were very hopeful that he would perform very well. He would be a disciplined cadre, and he would, go quite high up in the organization.
So the man who emerges from prison is popular, disciplined, a self-made, Shakespeare-loving freedom fighter, which makes what happens next so much stranger, so much sadder.
It's a very sad story. As I said, that many of us had great hopes on him. And somehow something went wrong.
In a field south of Johannesburg, forensic experts are gently removing dirt from a buried human skull.
Jen, can I get a brush, please? Yeah.
This kind of work has been going on for decades now. Investigators like Madeleine Fullard still hunting for the missing victims of South Africa's apartheid security forces.
The kinds of cases we recover are very, very different. But they all, in a sense, arise out of the conflicts of the past. And so our goal is to try to get some kind of information for families if they didn't have that information already.
Information for the relatives of people tortured and killed in the 1960s, 70s and 80s for daring to oppose white minority rule. But the apartheid security forces didn't just use guns and knives to eliminate their enemies. They also used poison.
They put the poison in my clothes. They wanted something that rubs against your skin. Initially, we thought it could be a watch or my briefcase where I handle it or my shoes. We never thought of underwears, but they put it in 5 of my underwears.
Frank Chikane was a student activist and prominent church leader, deeply involved in the increasingly violent struggle against apartheid.
It was a war zone, and we're like soldiers. It's either you die oppressed or you die fighting your oppression.
Chikane was visiting America when he experienced several devastating bouts of illness.
You start vomiting, you're throwing out, you start sweating, you are shaking, and can't walk, can't move. And in an hour's time, you are lying down like a lump of flesh and bones, but still conscious. But the problem, of course, is that I keep on wearing the next underwear. And so it hits you. Within 6 hours or so, it hits you.
Chikane had been poisoned with an organophosphate, a chemical used in pesticides. It was one of several poisons with which the apartheid security forces were eagerly experimenting.
It's very, very grim.
Imran Kuvadia is a writer and researcher based in Cape Town. He says the apartheid state was hunting for some very specific poisons.
They started with chemicals that could be easily converted, and they took, the one they seemed to use most of all was a substance called parathion, which is extremely poisonous, and they embedded it, they kind of soaked clothing in it, jeans, they inserted it into vitamins, into medicines, into tinned food. I mean, the most notorious example of this is the desire of the South African security establishment to find a poison that would cause cancer without being detectable, because they figured that if they could do that, they could give it to Nelson Mandela, release him, and have him die shortly afterwards. The South African security establishment wanted to find poisons that would affect blacks differently to whites. They believed that there were biological differences they could exploit. As it turns out, there are absolutely no such differences. So there is no poison that can distinguish between a black person and a white person. There aren't racially specific poisons, but they certainly dreamed of developing them. They were excited by all kinds of very, very grim alternatives and substances. They were very excited by AIDS because they thought it would solve this problem of black overpopulation. They dabbled in trying to find sterility drugs, which they could spray onto Black people involuntarily and cause them to not be able to have children. They also strangely dabbled in ecstasy because they believed that they could spray or administer ecstasy, MDMA, to rioters and therefore change their state of mind completely.
It is gruesome, fantastical stuff. And of course, it has echoes today with the nerve agents used to silence Russia's enemies. At the time, back in the 1970s and 80s in South Africa, all this was top secret. But enough evidence of the poison program was leaking out to spread fear through the ANC and the broader liberation movement.
We know that the ANC had developed a conspiratorial culture. I mean, understandably, they were under attack. ANC members were assassinated. We know that that kind of suspicion ran wild in the ANC after, from the 1970s onwards. Partly that was because it was an organization that was genuinely penetrated. There were many South African agents, double agents, working in their ranks.
Among those looking over their shoulders was Jacob Zuma. By now, he'd been released from prison on Robben Island and had immediately rejoined the struggle. Based in neighbouring Mozambique, Zuma rose quickly through the ranks of the liberation movement, sourcing guns, smuggling fighters back across the borders.
He ran a very tight ship, and I would say, and I would give him credit for that, he ran a very tight ship.
Mo Sheikh worked closely with Zuma at the time.
I have a long history with Jacob Zuma. I fell instantly in love with him, instantly under his spell.
At one point, Sheikh himself was caught and tortured by the enemy, by the apartheid government.
I had a bag put over me, suffocated, waterboarding. They make you drink lots of water and then start beating your stomach with water. This comes out in all different places. You grasp for breath, you stand up I stood for 3 days. Sleep deprivation was the other thing.
In the middle of all this, Zuma was sent to the Soviet Union, to Moscow, for special intelligence training. It was the height of the Cold War in the 1970s.
There was this constant battle between the USSR and the US, and everyone in between was seen as proxies. And all of that inculcated the Cold War mentality in everyone, right?
Not least in Jacob Zuma, who returned from the Soviet Union to Africa and was quickly involved in the hunt for traitors, for black South Africans working in secret for the white apartheid security forces.
So there's not an organization that existed in South Africa that was not infiltrated. And this infiltration was quite significant. So I could see how there existed a level of paranoia, because the security branch was very successful. So the enemy was brutal. And the effects of that brutality was real. So I would understand the nature of the paranoia that developed, because people were dying, people were getting killed, people were getting captured, disappeared.
And it is in this increasingly paranoid world that the ANC was accused of using poison too, of copying its enemy, of stooping to their level.
We needed to be different from our enemy.
Better.
We needed to be better. We needed to hold the moral high ground.
One case involved a promising young fighter, Tami Zulu. He was suddenly accused of leaking information about military operations. He was arrested by his comrades, interrogated for months, then released, only to die 2 days later. Zulu's tearful parents insisted he'd been poisoned.
It was very strange. Very sick, a bag of bones. Instead of being taken to hospital, he's thrown into the street to look after himself.
The ANC's own investigation reached the same conclusion.
He seemed to have died as a result of poisoning, and particularly as a result of a poison that is only mixable in alcohol.
Imran Kuvadia again.
When people tried to reconstruct this case, they said that he probably died as a result of drinking alcohol with ANC comrades, one or more of whom mixed this poison into his drink. Jacob Zuma was in charge of his custody.
Zuma was in charge. He's always denied poisoning Tami Zulu, and he may well be telling the truth. But two of his oldest comrades have told me in private that they do see a link between this incident and Zuma's growing obsession with poison. Could it be that the man whose favourite play was Macbeth, a book he learnt to read and love in prison, was, like Shakespeare's murderous king, haunted by guilt?
On the second half of the mandible will help us to tell whether it's male or female.
Back at the excavation site, the forensic investigators have found human teeth.
20, 30? Between late 20s.
Late 20s?
Yeah. His molars have erupted already, but there's not much wear on them.
That means they should soon be able to identify the body. But when it comes to detecting poison, the experts are cautious. In fact, more than cautious. They are sceptical.
I must say, South Africans are very attached to poison narratives.
Maybe too attached, according to Madeleine Fullard.
I think, accusations of poison play a highly political purpose, and they play a kind of a metaphorical, symbolic role in our public discourse. I am an anti-conspiracist, of note. It takes a lot to convince me of conspiracy theories, and for me, there's always a simpler explanation, almost always.
But now Jacob Zuma was developing a taste for conspiracies.
If they want to undermine a country, they use the citizens of those countries. In other words, they buy them, they recruit them, they use them to undertake their own.
That's coming up on Poison.
The documentary is just one of our BBC World Service podcasts. There are many others to choose from.
We launched the Global News Podcast back in 2007, and a decade and a half later, it is still the most downloaded podcast from the BBC World Service.
The Global News Podcast.
The Global News Podcast.
The Global News Podcast.
I think there's lots of reasons it's still so popular. It gives you a global view of what's going on in the news. You'll hear stories that you might not get to find out about anywhere else. And because we have offices all the way around the globe, you can often get a local perspective on a story, no matter where it's happening.
Pakistan, Nicaragua,
Ethiopia, Sumatra. And it's not all just wars and disaster and catastrophe. We also cover stories that are funny or curious or unexpected.
How tomato sauce is getting involved in the space race.
Because it's important that this is a podcast that you actually really want to listen to.
And finally, we report on a really big purchase, a dinosaur.
That's the Global News Podcast. All the news from around the world, and we might even make you smile.
This was really quite extraordinary.
Just search for the Global News Podcast.
Now, let's return to the documentary.
I'm Andrew Harding with Poison, the story of Jacob Zuma's toxic obsession and the battle for South Africa's future. And there's Zuma's homestead on the hillside, just to the right. It's huge and very, very fancy. It's a clear, warm day, and I've come back to Jacob Zuma's home village in Kandla. Much of it probably looks the same as it did when Zuma was growing up in poverty here. But one thing has changed. A dozen buildings, huge thatched roofs, and a big, big security fence all the way around it. It does look a little out of place amidst all these much, much more modest little homes. I drive through the front gates and into what feels like a lavish resort. Nice to meet you, sir. One of Zuma's sons, Edward, is here to meet me. I can see 3, 4 thatched buildings. And is this one for each of your father's wives?
They are that side. You will not be able to see them. They are that side.
Edward shows me round the more public areas of the Nkandla estate. This is the place his father returned to from exile in 1990 and reconnected with his traditional Zulu roots. Jacob Zuma was a big man now, and that meant taking more wives.
Well, growing up in a polygamous family, it has taught one many things. You always need to be a united force. Other than that, there were no problems at all. Definitely no problems.
But there were financial problems.
You had to integrate into existing society.
Because they'd come back broke, penniless.
Nothing.
Zuma's former comrade, Mo Sheikh, remembers how many former fighters struggled to adapt to life in a free South Africa.
Your kids needed to go to school, you needed transport, you needed to feed your families, etc.
And Zuma, embracing his new role as a Zulu patriarch, quickly seemed to struggle.
He started to see himself as a big man. Instead of being able to grapple with that issue in terms of modern economics, how much I earn, how much I spend, therefore what can I afford? He believed to grapple with the problem is that he's just going to keep expanding the income side. And beyond what he earns, what can I borrow? What can I get?
So this is where the rot set in.
I think this is where created dependency got him in lots of trouble.
As Zuma's political career accelerated, the financial scandals quickly began piling up. His advisor was found guilty of soliciting bribes. Zuma himself was charged with corruption. Later, he'd be charged and cleared of rape too. But it was Nkandla, his rural homestead, that soon became the clearest symbol of excess and entitlement.
The homestead that's been making headlines.
Public money amounting to about 200 million rands was used to upgrade the house.
It's the house that cost the South African state over $20 million. And it could cost President Zuma millions of votes in the country's upcoming election.
He was obsessed. The Nkandla place that he built is bigger than the royal family house and so on.
Mavuso Msimang is another prominent struggle veteran.
Here was the big man, building a huge house and wielding authority and having the power to be listened to.
And it's now that Zuma, fighting off endless allegations of corruption, starts talking about plots against him.
Some people wanted me dead, and indeed it was quite a strong poison.
He starts demanding that his food is tested.
The protectors check the food to see whether it's okay.
Ibrahim notices the change.
I think they would taste it for him.
You saw that?
Yes, I did see that, yeah.
So he was constantly on guard?
He was constantly on guard, definitely. He was constantly on guard, yeah.
By now, Zuma has married 6 times and has had several other relationships. His polygamy seems wrong or embarrassingly antiquated to some. To others, it's inspiring. In 2009, Zuma becomes South Africa's president, a modern leader, not afraid to cherish, to flaunt his Zulu heritage.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is Zuma's 4th wife, Ma Ntuli, giving an interview to a South African broadcaster, Newsroom Africa.
And giving me this opportunity to come and explain about this, because I never had any chance to speak about it, especially in public.
Martin Tooley was speaking in 2019 to the legal journalist Karen Morn. She told her about an incident that occurred a few years after her wedding, an incident when Zuma accused Martin Tooley of trying to poison him.
They said Baba was given the poison by tea, of which I never made any tea for Baba with poison.
Martin Tooley and her children were immediately expelled from Nkandla. She was interrogated without a lawyer, made to take lie detector tests, and formally charged with trying to kill Zuma.
I think that 5 years, it was like 5 years in hell. Abused, I felt so much abused and betrayed.
There are two things that make this episode extraordinary, or rather, more extraordinary. The first is what it appears to reveal about the rot setting in South Africa's democratic institutions, because at no stage was any evidence produced to indicate poisoning or to implicate Martin Tooley.
And to find out there was no evidence of some sort, it's paining.
And yet, Martin Tooley was hounded for years by the police, by prosecutors, by the security services. The implication being that they were working not in the interests of justice, but on behalf of President Zuma personally, an indication to many of a creeping autocracy. But that wasn't all. Zuma didn't just wrongly accuse his wife of trying to poison him. All charges were eventually dropped. He also accused her of treason.
They said I had what you call this intelligent person that I was working with from overseas.
Zuma suspected his wife of working for a foreign intelligence organization.
It is an accepted thing or a known thing that if they want to undermine a country, they use the citizens of those countries. In other words, they buy them, they recruit them, they use them to undertake their own.
I'm calling a clinic in Moscow, a place known to have close ties to the Kremlin.
Добрый день.
This is, we believe, where President Jacob Zuma was treated for alleged poisoning back in 2014. Two other prominent African leaders have also made visits to the same clinic for the same reason.
Нет, не родственник, но он там лежит. Я журналист из BBC.
Not surprisingly, the clinic tells me it's none of my business who they treat. But what on earth is going on here?
We could see that you were in a weakened state. We'd realised that you'd been poisoned.
This is one of Jacob Zuma's sons, Duduzane, speaking in a conversation with his father, which he later posted online, along with some backing music. The two are discussing Zuma's emergency flight to Moscow.
So we travelled to Russia to deal with the issues, and there was an excellent medical staff that treated you. I mean, the results speak for themselves. You survived.
That was one of the toughest challenges that I've faced when I was poisoned. Yes. But it was actually a very sophisticated kind of poison. And I knew that my friend, who was a president at that time in his country.
He's talking here, it's fair to assume, of Vladimir Putin.
And that's why I sent a message to him. He sent doctors, which was very quiet, to see me, who then recommended that indeed I should go to a place where we finally went with you.
No one has ever revealed exactly what went wrong with Zuma. All we really have is his own rather vague account.
There were 3 types of different poisons that were put to me together. Not just one type. There were actually 3 very dangerous. When I looked at them and what they do to the human body, I did not believe that I survived that one, but I did.
If Zuma was poisoned, and we only have his word for it, then who did it? Zuma has claimed, again rather vaguely, that it's the West.
It's because of my beliefs politically about how the countries or our country should be.
Zuma has been talking about a Western plot to kill him, or at least to destroy him politically, since the early 1990s. And remember, he was trained in Russia during the Cold War.
So there was a sense in which, in Jacob Zuma's universe, he is a target of the Western governments. He very much believes that America and the West were out to get him.
This is Karen Morn, a legal journalist, who sees a link back to South Africa's liberation struggle and Zuma's Cold War loyalty to Moscow.
Politically, he's in the camp with Russia, he's in the camp with China.
At this point, let's meet one of Jacob Zuma's most loyal aides, a man who was once Nelson Mandela's spokesman until his own career was upended by financial scandal. These days, Carl Niehaus speaks on behalf of Jacob Zuma.
The suggestion then being that the CIA, Britain's MI6, are trying to kill Jacob Zuma because they want a more right or centre-right leaning governing party in South Africa.
Obviously, that is part of the possibility, yes.
Do you believe that?
I'm not beating around the bush. I believe that the possibility of that kind of situation is a very real one.
He was in power, president for 9 years, and was never killed. It doesn't reflect well on these foreign agencies if they've tried poisoning him and failed.
Well, obviously, you tried to cast doubt on that. I'm telling you that I think there is a real danger, and that danger has to be taken seriously.
But the fact remains we have no way of being sure that Zuma was ever poisoned, which leads me to wonder if we're looking at this the wrong way round. What if Russia was the one in the driving seat here?
There seems to be a clinic somewhere in Moscow which specializes in, I guess, telling these politicians what they want to hear about their diagnosis, in inferring the existence of some mysterious poison.
The South African writer Imran Kuvadia suspects that Zuma was being played by the Russians.
Is it your thought then that the Russian security intelligence community is deliberately giving these people like Zuma, the idea that they've been poisoned, even if it's false, to give them some sort of leverage over South African politics?
I find it hard to believe anything else.
It is a tantalizing theory. And speaking of leverage, right at the moment when President Zuma was in a Moscow clinic, the Russians had a particular interest in South Africa. They were looking to win a contract to build nuclear power plants there.
So this idea that Putin has saved his life from poisoning, that helps cement the loyalty to Moscow and the loyalty to a Russian nuclear deal.
Absolutely. Jacob Zuma believes that he would have died without the help of the Russians.
Were the Russians playing on Zuma's fears, exploiting his paranoia about poison? It's certainly possible. But that begs another, equally important question.
You drank water that I gave you?
You
drank the water I gave you?
Yes, that's fine. I don't think the BBC will poison me.
You never know.
This is Zuma's aide, Carl Niehaus again, sitting in the BBC studio in Johannesburg. The question I have for him is why go to Russia, or for that matter to Cuba, where Zuma went in 2019, again for alleged poisoning treatment? Why not use one of South Africa's world-class hospitals?
I think there's a good reason to believe that President Zuma understood that his life was in danger.
That if he went to hospital here, he might be killed?
That is correct.
It's an extraordinary thing to believe.
Of course it is.
It's here that our story takes another twist, away from Moscow and back home to the power struggles within South Africa's governing party. Power struggles that are turning more dangerous by the day.
Over a period of time, I've refused to drink a cup of tea made in the Tuli House.
This is the ANC headquarters in Johannesburg.
ANC headquarters.
Because somebody might poison you.
Yes.
What does it say about the factional battles within the ANC that people are now watching, not just what they say, but what they eat?
The African National Congress is a sadly and deeply divided organization.
Which is where the poison trail takes us next. On a crisp winter's morning, Jacob Zuma walks into a crowded hall in Johannesburg. Zuma has been summoned here in 2019 to testify under oath and on live television at a corruption inquiry. He walks past me on his way to the witness box.
How are you feeling, Mr. Zuma? Ready to tell the truth?
Zuma looks appropriately grim. After all, he's just been stripped of his job as South Africa's president due to his alleged corruption. He is in disgrace, vulnerable, that he's facing a mountain of detailed accusations, including the claim that his obsession with poison, his belief that people are trying to kill him, is pure fantasy.
Would you please state your full names for the record?
I'm Jacob Gedlehlekisa Zuma.
Do you swear that the evidence you are going to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you very much. You may be seated.
On the stand, Jacob Zuma is sworn in, his trademark chuckle now replaced by near constant throat clearing. This is a moment of reckoning for South Africa. For years, Zuma has batted away all accusations of wrongdoing. But now he's under oath and in the spotlight. Video footage is played.
Yes.
A hidden camera has captured businessmen counting the cash they'll hand out as bribes to senior government officials.
3, 4, 5 million. Is that right?
3 fees. They still haven't given me that 6,000 extra.
Okay.
But I'll follow up again today.
It's alleged that Zuma conspired with a business family, the Guptas, to loot the South African state of billions of dollars, and then to weaken its institutions, the prosecution service for one, in order to get away with it. All lies, Zuma and the Guptas insist. But then the focus shifts to poison, to Zuma's unprecedented demand for his own toxicology unit.
We were told that this was a project to recruit toxicologists to test the food and bedding of then-President Zuma.
The extraordinary cost, running into millions of dollars, is revealed. And yet at no stage was any poison detected anywhere, not a drop. In fact, the only risk to Zuma involved some soda that had passed its sell-by date.
The only threat that had been detected was expired cool drinks.
Yes, she did indicate that to us. Yeah.
Confronted with all this, cornered, you might argue, Jacob Zuma lashes out.
I have been provoked and provoked to the last degree.
He talks of unnamed spies in the ANC, traitors who want him dead.
I have survived attempts to kill me. People looking to poison me or being instructed by their handlers to do so. Finally poisoned. The very dangerous poison.
And then Zuma simply walks out of the inquiry. And there's a term for that. Contempt of court. Which brings us almost to the present day, to July of this year. and the police are arriving at Zuma's home in Nkandla, preparing to escort him to prison, his supporters trying to block them. Because earlier this year, Zuma was sentenced to 15 months in jail for contempt of court. He's also on trial for corruption. It feels like Zuma has finally run out of options and excuses. Veterans of the liberation struggle, men like Mavuso Msimang, are queuing up to condemn him.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't think many people believe this poison story. I really don't think they did. I just think it's a way of attracting attention and diverting it from the issues that have been confronting him for the last 15 years or so, namely that of having been accused of corruption.
End of story then. Not quite. Because although Zuma is eventually taken to prison, he still has influence. And within hours of his arrest, violence spreads across his home province of KwaZulu-Natal and the city of Durban. Within days, 300 people are dead, and a huge chunk of the economy has been devastated by looting and arson. There is convincing evidence to show that the violence was, at least initially, orchestrated, that this was an attempted insurrection by Zuma's allies.
There are people who have committed crimes who don't want to go to jail, and they want to bring down this country.
This is Frank Chikane, the man who once put on poisoned underpants.
I can assure you now that the people of this country are not going to allow this nonsense. They might kill people, they might cause pain, they might make people lose their jobs, but nobody is going to follow this madness.
But what if he's wrong? What if Zuma, the Zulu patriarch, tries to split South Africa on ethnic lines, to whip up his Zulu supporters and to undermine Nelson Mandela's vision of a rainbow nation? Zuma's old comrade, Mo Sheikh, is worried.
I think Zuma, in many ways, has become a point around which that ethno-chauvinistic mobilization is occurring. And for me, that is dangerous.
And so there's a thread that connects Zuma's life, his fears of poisoning, his sense of victimhood, to what could ultimately be South Africa's unravelling.
If left on its own.
It is a chilling thought. And there is another risk, because Zuma's talk of poison and victimhood has now been twisted into a much larger story of betrayal. It's a story Zuma's own children are championing.
Trouble is coming. So if they don't sort this mess out now, I'm telling you, our country is doomed.
Sitting at the Zuma family's lavish homestead of Nkandla, Edward Zuma seeks to turn his father's humiliations into political capital. His populist message goes something like this. It's not just the Zumas who are being betrayed, let down by South Africa's justice system and its so-called democracy. It is the black majority which has also been betrayed, sold out by treacherous leaders, marginalised by powerful white businessmen. The solution? Mandela's hard-won constitution must be torn up. A revolution is required.
You will tell them about the constitution. They will burn it in front of your eyes. To say, don't tell me about the constitution when I'm hungry. Don't tell me about the constitution when I'm unemployed. That time is coming.
The critics say you're exploiting those fears to drum up support.
No, we're actually not exploiting those fears. It's something that is coming, you understand? It's something that is coming. This thing will haunt us. It will haunt us because the youngsters, they are losing patience.
And so Zuma's poison conspiracy takes on a new meaning, a new life, as a populist message of rage and despair. Will it catch on? I'm not so sure. South Africa is certainly struggling, but Jacob Zuma had a chance to fix it, and he failed conspicuously. Aged 79 now, he was recently released from prison on medical parole. As usual, precisely what ails him remains a mystery. Poison was written and presented by me, Andrew Harding. The producer was Vuldi Karelse. It was mixed by James Beard.